Hello plant lovers and welcome to my channel. Thank you again for tuning in, and this week's orchid is Masdevallia. Look at this baby. I am so excited that it came into bloom. I had never heard of these orchids until I was doing some research into cool and cold climate orchids and came across them. And then I found a great nursery in Victoria here in Australia, and ta-da, there we go. Masdevallia is my new favorite orchid because, plant lovers, they are really easy. Okay, let's get to some basics. Firstly, where am I? I am in Melbourne, Southeast Australia, as you can see. Our climate here is a cool temperate climate with really hot summers. I don't think anything's as simple as you'd like it to be, but it's kind of the equivalent to a climate zone 10 in the US and milder parts of the southeast of the UK. And right now it is mid-spring here in sunny Melbourne, although it's a miserable day today, but never mind. And this baby has come out to bloom, and I am very excited by it. In fact, I'm so excited that it's bloomed and they seem so easy that I've just ordered 3 more. But I thought we'd go over some details about Masdevallia. First things first, Masdevallia are well known as a cold to cool growing orchid. Now, I often look at those descriptors with a bit of a grain of salt, but I'm here to tell you that this baby lives outdoors here in Melbourne all year. And to explain how that is possible, Masdevallias generally are an Andean species, so they grow along the spine of South America at quite high altitude, so they are used to cool, cold, humid, damp environments. As you can see, they don't have pseudobulbs, so there is nowhere for them to store water, so they're used to a fairly constant supply of water, which is something to bear in mind, but we'll get to that. High altitude, cool to cold growing in a humid environment. That's the thing to remember. They are generally epiphytes. Sometimes they can be terrestrial as well, but the rule of thumb, as with most orchids, is a pretty free draining medium, which is what I have mine in. Being cool and cold, I'm not sure to what extreme the cold can go, but here in Melbourne we can get down to 1 degree Celsius, which is just shy of 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Pretty cold. I think they'd be frost tolerant for the odd frosty morning. I think if you had consistently frosty cold winters, you might want to bring them indoors. But here in Melbourne, they can live outside all year. However, they are a cool to cold growing high altitude orchid, which means they don't love the heat. For me here in Melbourne, then the issue is the summer temperatures. So Melbourne summers are all over the place, but there's generally a few days where it does get well over 40 degrees Celsius, which is what, 105 degrees Fahrenheit? Anyway, hot, let's just say. These orchids don't like such temperatures. But because it's outdoors and it's very shady and it's very dappled and quite breezy, it's quite easy for me to cool down the temperatures out there. Just give the whole area a bit of a hose in the morning if you know it's going to be really hot. So this baby has thrived quite well throughout the Melbourne summer. It's perky, its leaves didn't change colour or drop or do anything unpleasant. So I think as long as you don't have constant extreme heat, you should be okay, even if you have reasonably warm summers. So if you're living somewhere very hot, you need to put them in the coolest place possible. But really, if you're in a very hot climate, they're not going to thrive, I don't think. This, plant lovers, is the orchid for us in a cool, cold environment. There we go, temperature sorted out. Next is water. Now, as I said, they are high altitude, so they're used to a lot of cool humidity, and they're used to pretty constant rainfall, but being epiphytic or terrestrial, but in loose draining material, they don't want to be soggy, but they don't want to dry out. As they can't store water for themselves, you really can't let these dry out. So this is not an orchid to go away on holiday and forget about, knowing that it's going to be perky and say hello when you come back. It will be dead. Keep it on the moist side, not wringing wet, but don't let it dry out. Which means, in my rule book, a little often, which is good for all of us. Obviously, if it's really warm in summer, you might want to give it a really cool douse every day, and in winter ease up, but it still needs to be watered in winter, unlike a lot of other orchids. Light. Now, it is, I think, it's a little similar to Phaphopedilums, but it's also similar to Nobile Dendrobiums in that it doesn't like direct sunlight at all. It prefers shade or very dappled light, but it does like winter sun. So there's the thing. Not too much though. So what I was able to do with this particular one was give it morning sun in winter, a direct sun at that, Although it's outside, the sun is quite low in Australia at this point, so the penetration was really good. And then it was pretty dappled and shady for the rest of the day. And then in summer, it's in fairly constant shade. The leaves will burn and the leaves will react quite quickly if it's overheated or gets too much sun. And they are fairly delicate, so I don't think it would bounce back. I've only had this one for, I don't know, maybe 6 months, and it was just leaves when I bought it. So I had no idea where the flower spike was going to come from or when it would flower or what the process was. So as I said, it's now mid-spring here in Melbourne, and this flower spike appeared maybe 3 weeks ago. So spring bloomer. I'm not sure if that's consistent across all of them, but this is what's happened for me. And as you can see, it produces single beautiful, actually really beautiful, strappy leaves. And what you can see is, and I'll come in closer to show you, is that the flower actually comes from the base joint of an established leaf. So, plant lovers, as with many orchids, what you need to encourage is vegetative growth, because the more mature leaves you have, the more chance you have of a flower spike coming from that leaf. Now, as I've only had this for a year, I'm not sure if each leaf can then produce subsequent flower spikes year on, or whether that leaf then matures, dies, and because it's so vigorous, it's rapidly replaced with others. Not sure yet. Watch this space. But what I can tell you is that it is a very vigorous grower. So I've had this, 6 months or so, but it is constantly sending up new leaf shoots. So I'm hoping next year, when it's really settled in, I'll get multiple blooms. And you should, by the time you get a bigger specimen plant, get multiple blooms on these. This one is called Masdevallia Copper Sun Humungous. And as we discussed with Miltonopsis names, not a great name. Anyway, I love you and it's fantastic. Masdevallia, incidentally, were named after José Masdeval, who was a botanist with the court of Charles III of Spain in the 18th century. And they are described as a sub-tribe of the orchid family, which is kind of lovely. I think we can all aspire to be part of a sub-tribe. The flower isn't fragrant. I'm not quite sure how long it's going to last, but we'll see. The other thing you can see are these sort of whiskery tail things at the back of the flower, which I will show you here. So these things, depending on the hybrid, they can obviously come down. And I'm not sure, perhaps as the flower matures, maybe those whiskers will come down a little bit. I'm not sure. But some of them have quite open whiskers. And as with many orchids, there are a million hybrids out there now with incredible speckling and striping and ones that really do look like there's a face in the heart of the flower. So as I said, because this was so easy and it bloomed so quickly, I've ordered 3 more. So we'll see how they go. Lastly then, the medium, I've just used the same orchid mix I use for anything. So it's a fast draining bark based medium with a bit of perlite and a little bit of charcoal in there just to keep it nice and free draining. I always put a couple of grains of slow release fertilizer in, and then, once every couple of weeks or so, a quite diluted little dose of a liquid seaweed fertilizer, just to give it a cocktail every Sunday afternoon. There we are. Incredibly easy for me here in Melbourne. It sits outside on a covered terrace, so it's protected from rain. It's in dappled light, so it's sitting underneath other palms and ferns and things. So it's very protected in that regard. There we are. Incredibly easy to grow, and the flowers are stunning. And as the plant gets bigger, they are quite floriferous, as they say in the trade, I think. There we are, plant lovers. Masdevallia 101. Definitely cool to cold growing. Definitely doesn't like summer, doesn't like the heat, does like to be kept moist all the time, and does like a little bit, well actually quite a lot of strong winter light. Other thing is, of course, plant lovers, terracotta pot, because I am a terracotta pot kind of guy. But as with all things, whatever works for you is totally fine. And to some degree, it also depends on your environment. Masdevallias are a cool to cold growing orchid. So terracotta is quite good because it evaporates quite quickly and produces like its own evaporative refrigeration service. So yeah, whatever works best for you. The only important thing is, of course, to make sure that it's very free draining. I hope that was useful. If you have any questions, bearing in mind I am a complete amateur and know nothing, please do leave them below and I'll see if I can answer them. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you next week with our next orchid installment. See you then.